Hey guys, so now let's take a look at how we can implement buttons inside of our application. So in the previous versions of Flutter, we had something called as a flat button, a raised button, and an outline button. So all these buttons are actually replaced with a new set of buttons, that is text button, elevated button, and an outlined button. Okay, so we'll be taking a look at how we can implement the new buttons. Okay, so before that, let's just start off with the basic button. Okay, so we'll start off with something called as a floating action button, which is implemented inside of our scaffold. Okay, so the floating action button is a widget itself, so we'll pass in the floating action button, and the floating action button can also take in something called as a child. Okay, so you can set in a text as a child, or you can give it an icon itself. Okay, so since we have not worked with icons, let's just try implementing an icon. Okay, so for that we'll be passing in the icon widget, and inside of the icon widget we'll pass in the icons dot whatever icon you want to pass in. So I'll pass in the phone icon for now, and let's just save that. Okay, so now we can see our phone floating button is actually there. Okay, so by default it comes with a blue color. Okay, and if you try clicking on it, nothing really happens, and that is because we have not set an on pressed feature. Okay, so we can set the on pressed feature, and let's give that null for now, and let's also change the background color. So it would be colors dot, let's give it red. Okay, so now we can see our button changed to a red color, as well as we have set an on press property. Okay, if you try clicking on that, you can see it is clickable. Okay, and to implement something, a command, we can pass any sort of command inside of the curly braces. Okay, so inside that we'll pass in something like you click me, and we'll end that with a semicolon. Okay, and let's just save that and click on this, and you'll see that it shows you click me. Okay, so that is the first kind of button we'll be looking at. The next kind of button is called as the text button. Okay, so we'll implement that inside of our column. Okay, and let's pass in the children, and let's start calling the text button. Okay, so again the text button also has something called as an on press. Okay, and we also have something called as an on long press. Okay, so let's just set that to null for now. We can also pass in a child, and for this child we'll pass in a text widget itself. So we'll just write text button just to differentiate, and let's also give it a style, and let's set the font size to 30. All right. Okay, let's just save that. Okay, now we can see our text button is there, but it does not have any sorts of background. Okay, and that is because by default our text widget absorbs the background color of the body itself. Okay, and that is one of the main property of a text button. Okay, so in case you want to change the background of the text button, we can also do that, and for that we'll be calling the style property. Okay, and inside of the style property we can pass in the text button dot style from. Okay, and inside the style we can set something like a background color. So we'll take in a colors dot, let's make it purple. Okay, let's just see if that works. Yeah, okay, it is visible, but yeah. So that is how we can set the background color of a text button. Okay, and if you want to change the color of the text itself, you can set something called as a primary, and also pass in a color. All right, let's pass in. Okay, now we can see our text button is actually more visible. Okay, In a similar way, we can also write code inside of these curly braces, and let's just copy paste this inside both of this, and let's just save that. Okay, so every time you click the button, you will get a prompt saying you clicked me. And if you try long pressing it, okay, let's just change the long press text. Okay, let's just save that. And now if you try long pressing it, it shows you click me too long. And if you press that, it shows you click me. Okay, so that is the second type of button that we are learning today. Okay, so in so after the text button, let's place something called as a sized box. Okay, sized box is nothing but an empty container to make space between each of the buttons. Okay, yeah, so let's give it a height, and height could be of, let's say, 70 pixels. Okay, so if I save that, you'll see nothing there, but actually it is a blank container. Okay, so if I pass in the next widget, you'll be able to see the difference. Okay, so let me pass in the next button, so that is called as the elevated button. Okay, again we can see we have something called as an on pressed. Okay, so let's just copy all of this because it's going to be the same. Okay, we also have something like a styling property inside this, so let's just pass in, oops, I should have copy pasted all of that. Okay, let's also copy paste this. Let's just change the text to elevated button and we'll keep that same. Okay, now let's pass in a style property, and inside the style property, the only thing that is going to differ is the elevated button dot style from. Okay, so notice every time you pass in a button, that particular button name is inside of the style property. Okay, so don't mess this up because then your properties won't start working. Okay, so the elevated button, okay, let's just save this and see what happens before we pass in the color. Okay, so the elevated button has a default color on its own, right? So that is the first difference. So you can see I have not passed in any sort of color here, and it has a default coloring on its own. Now to change the default coloring, I can pass in something called as a primary. Okay, so the primary takes in a color, and let's pass the color to a teal accent. Okay, and we also have something called as an on primary, so that changes the color of the widget inside of the button. So inside of that, I'll pass in, okay, let's pass in a dark color, and that will be indigo. Okay, so now we can see our second button is created, and the primary color is the teal accent, which goes as the background, whereas the on primary is the color of the text itself. Okay, so in case you want to make changes to the size, we can also set a minimum size property, and that will take in a size widget. Okay, so inside the size widget you can pass in a width and a height. Okay, so the width could be something like, let's say, 150, and okay, let's give it 100, and let's set the height to 50. Okay, so let's just save that, and now we can see our elevated button has taken shape. Okay, similarly we can also do this minimum size property for the text button as well, so that remains the same over there. Okay, so yeah, so that is one of the things we can do inside of the elevated button. Okay, so the next type of widget or the button widget is going to be the, yeah, so it's going to be an outlined button. Okay, so we'll just place in the sized box. Okay, so we can see there's a gap over here, and that is because of the sized box, right? So after every widget we'll be placing a sized box to just make it look a little better. So let's just pass in the next button. So that is going to be the outline button. Okay, and yeah, let's just separate it with a comma. Okay, and let's just copy all of this inside of this, and let's just change the text to outline button. Okay, the outline button also has a styling property, and that will be defined by the outlined button dot style from, and inside of that you can pass in the border. Okay, so before that, let's just save this and see what happens. Okay, so by default we have no outline to this button, and this outline takes in the background color. Okay, so to give it a border, let's pass in the side property. Okay, and we can enable the border side widget. Okay, inside the border side we can give it a thickness. Okay, so the thickness would be of, let's say, 10 pixels, and let's also pass in the color. Okay, so the color would be colors dot, let's set that to indigo as well. Okay, now we can see our button took shape, but the border is actually covering the text. Okay, so for that we'll give it a minimum size, and inside the size let's pass in, now we can see our outline button is ready. Okay, so I hope you guys understood the difference between the three buttons. Okay, so these are the really new buttons implemented by Flutter. And if you do have any sorts of question, please do mention in the comments below. You can also sit and play around with these properties to get to know a lot more. Okay, so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did enjoy, please support us by hitting the like button. So stay safe, and thank you for watching.